Hi guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Today we're going to be making the Gaia dress. The pattern is already up on the website. The dress is a sheared boat neck dress with a grown on skirt. The whole dress is really only 2 pattern pieces, but the way of constructing it, it's gonna be a little bit different. This dress was originally a free tutorial that is still up on my Instagram account if you want to watch that before you decide whether you want to buy the pattern or not. But the pattern just kind of ensures that there isn't gonna be too much trial and error when you decide to make it. Unlike for me, it took me 3 whole dresses to come up with a method that works every time. But anyways, if you want to know how to make it, just keep watching. Here's what you'll need. The pattern printed and cut with a fold along the last line of shirring line. There will be a video going up straight after this one that goes into how to assemble a PDF pattern. 2 meters of lightweight fabric. I am using Cupro here. I wouldn't recommend anything above 130 GSM as it won't shear very tightly. You also want the texture of the fabric to not be too stiff. A fabric pen, either water erasable or iron off. I like these iron off gel pens since they can write on black fabric and you want to be able to draw a thin, accurate line. Shirring elastic, I am using a wholesale roll, however you can purchase this from any major brands. The brand shouldn't make too much of a difference. 1 meter of 6 to 10 millimeter elastic for the neckline. This is optional, but I highly recommend it. For the tools, you'll need some measuring equipment, cutting tools, pins, and matching thread. And of course, your sewing machine and an iron. Okay, the first thing that we're gonna do though, even before you decide to buy the pattern, we are gonna make a sample. First, I've cut out a 10 centimeter by 10 centimeter square. This is mainly an important step to figure out how much your machine shears your fabric. I've found that every machine, and depending on what materials you use, it can come out differently. First, you want to draw out your shearing lines. I would advise you do this the same pattern that you plan to do the dress in. For the dresses that I've made, I've done 1 shearing line 1 centimeter apart and then the next one 2 centimeters apart, and then I alternate between those. The very first thing we are going to do is wind our bobbin with shirring elastic. A lot of tutorials will tell you to hand wind the bobbin. However, I have found that this technique is a lot quicker. So what I like to do is thread the elastic through the hole in the bobbin and just hold that over the bobbin winder. I use my other hand to hold the other end of elastic, and the most important part of this is that the tension in your hand while it is winding is correct. You want to hold the elastic at the point just before it becomes slack so that you're not stretching it at all. I find that it helps to unravel the elastic from the spool a few meters so it doesn't get caught while you're winding. I keep holding the first hand over the bobbin until it's wound around a few times, and then it should just continue to wind without you holding it. When the bobbin is full, you can cut the elastic and the small tail sticking out of the hole. Now we're going to talk through the settings. You want the tension to be as high as your machine goes. Mine goes to number 9. A straight stitch, that is just a 0 on mine. This isn't a zigzag stitch, so don't worry about the width of your stitch, but the length of your stitch, you want it as high as your machine goes. Mine goes up to 5, that's it. When you thread your machine, thread your top thread normally with your regular sewing thread and use the shirring elastic in the bobbin. Once again, threading as you would your usual thread. I am lowering my needle here to pick up the elastic up from the bottom. Now we are ready to sew. Sew along the lines you have drawn. When you get past the first row, you will have to start stretching the fabric out a little as you sew in order to keep it flat. I also recommend snaking around the ends of the row to avoid having to cut the thread. This also saves a bit of elastic. Just make sure you pull out a bit of elastic at the end of each row so that the ends are not tight. Once you have finished your sample, give it a steam and a press. I forgot to do it here, but you should. You want to measure the width of your sample. The goal is to make sure that the shirring has shrunk your fabric to about half or 0.5 times its original width. Within 0.4 and 0.6 times is the range you should be aiming for. Here is how my sample of cotton poplin came out. It's the one on the left. The only thing that was different was the fabric, and you can see the cotton poplin doesn't shear as much as the Cupro as it is slightly heavier and ever so slightly slightly stiffer. That's basically it for the sample. Essentially, if you / your machine can make this, you're good to go. This dress is going to be a breeze. Hi, it's Editing Mina. The color of the fabric for this tutorial does change from the black to the green one or vice versa. I hope it's not going to be too confusing. When I was making the black one, I also used that as an opportunity to add more clips to make the video as easy to understand as possible. It's just the color of the fabric that is changing. If you need to, print and tape your pattern pieces together and cut them out. Now we need to cut a length of fabric that is the full length of the pattern with a little to spare. If you want a longer skirt, increase this. I recommend about 10 extra centimeters to spare. If you are just working with a full 2-meter length of fabric, to make it easier, I recommend just folding your fabric in half and using 1 meter for each panel, as the scraps you will be left with probably won't be enough to make another item, and this gives you the longer skirt for you to shorten to the exact length you want. Fold your fabric where you want to cut it across and snip the selvage to tear it to create a perfect horizontal cut. If your fabric doesn't tear, use this fold line as a guide to cut across. This is going to be the top of your 2 shared panels. If you need to, iron out your fabric. Take a measurement from the top shoulder point to the line indicating the last line of shirring. Add about 5 centimeters more to this measurement. This is how far down you are going to be shirring. Then prepare the lines to map out your shirring pattern. As with the samples, a 1 centimeter and 2 centimeter alternating gap was used. However, you can space out your shirring lines as you please. If you want to skip this entire part, you can just use printed fabric with a gingham type print and use the print as your guide. Laying the ruler down perpendicular to the top edge and parallel to the selvage, you want to first mark all of your vertical points to indicate the spacing. I did this across the width of the fabric about 40 centimeters apart. You don't want to make them too far apart width-wise, as you could lose accuracy. After marking all your vertical points, lay the ruler down parallel to the top edge and draw out your shirring lines by connecting the points. I drew every other line since this would save a bit of time, and I could line up the presser foot to the previous line with 1 centimeter gaps. I found that the easiest and quickest way to do this was actually not on the table as I'm doing here, but actually on the floor. This means you don't have to keep shifting the fabric across the table. I think I completed all of my lines on both pieces of fabric within about 20 minutes. After you've marked all of your lines, it's time to finally start shirring. Prepare your bobbins with shirring elastic. I would recommend filling a few bobbins at a time so you don't have to keep task switching as you sew, and I went through about 10 of these. Set your machine exactly like how we did when we made the sample at the start of the video. Start sewing your lines. As you get further down, it becomes harder to keep the shirring consistent. Try not to pull on the fabric as it is coming out of the back of the machine too much. Just flatten it from the front and let the machine pull the fabric through. Don't worry if every line is not perfect. Snake the lines of stitching like we did with the sample. To start a new piece of elastic in the middle of a line, backstitch at the beginning to prevent the shirring from unraveling. Keep sewing until you reach your final line of shirring. When you have completed your panels, square them up either to a cutting mat or the edge of a table. It's not unusual for some areas to be a little inconsistent and some lines of shirring to be slightly looser than others. Here we just want to make sure the fabric has been squared up so that the pattern pieces do not continue to follow that inconsistency. It is better to stretch out the parts that are slightly tighter than to scrunch up the looser parts in order to get it squared. You can use tape to hold all of this down, but leave the skirt part as it is. Next, place one of your pattern pieces onto the shirred fabric so that the last line of shirring matches up with the line indicated on the pattern. Use the fold we created in the pattern to fold up the pattern and line up that edge to the last line of shirring. Mark the hem of the skirt. This can be either the end of the pattern piece or to your desired length. You can also just leave this if you want to use the entire length of the remaining fabric as your skirt. If your fabric tears, mark the point by the selvage and tear the fabric across. If it does not, measure down the same distance from the last line of shirring at different points and connect those points and then cut across. Pin or use fabric weights to keep your pattern in place. Then cut around your pattern, but stopping when you get to the skirt. Either tear the fabric straight down from the last line of shirring if your fabric allows, or draw a line square down from the last line of shirring using the selvage of the fabric to mark it accurately. I marked points equidistant from each selvage and then connected those points before cutting. Here I didn't cut the hem until after I had already cut the body of the dress out. It doesn't really matter whether you do it before or after. Those two steps are kind of interchangeable. Repeat steps 16 to 21 for your other pattern piece. Iron both pieces to remove the pen and even out the shirring. Now you should have one front and one back piece ready to be sewn together. Overlock/overcast the perimeter of your fabric, excluding the hem. You can do this with the overcast stitch on your machine if you don't have an overlocker. This is the stitch and the matching foot on my machine for overcasting, but please check your manual if you are not sure. I do have an overlocker, so I did just overlock these seams. On the neckline and armholes, try your best not to stretch it. If you find it very difficult to sew without stretching, adding the optional elastic in the next few steps will fix this. Here you can add your label, sew down the sides and leave the middle slack so the fabric can still stretch. Next, sew the side seams and shoulder seams together, right sides facing. At this stage, you can try the piece on in case you want to make any changes to the fit, including length changes to the hem. For me personally, I find that I pretty often have to take it in at the shoulder seam, but only on the inner side. My shoulders are quite square. Fold the armholes under 1 centimeter and sew in place using a straight stitch. So I finished the dress, but as you can see, the neckline hasn't come out great. It sits like not close to the body. When I was sewing it, it kind of was stretching while it was sewing, and you ideally want to sew it so that it's not stretching at all, and then this has caused like the wobbling at the top. So what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna unpick it and then potentially put an elastic in it. You could probably get away with keeping it unstretched if you're really careful feeding it into the machine. If you don't want to be that careful, an elastic is probably going to be slightly easier. The easiest way to work out how much elastic you need is by placing your elastic on the pattern itself and just cutting it 1 to 2 centimeters shorter, as well as marking the shoulder point to help match it up to your garment easier. Here is a chart where I have worked out the length you need already, but you will have to recalculate this if you made changes to your neckline like I have. Stretch and pin the elastic evenly to the neckline. Sew the elastic to the inside of the neckline using a zigzag stitch, starting from one shoulder seam and matching the notch at the other. When you reach the end, overlap the elastic by 1 centimeter and sew over to secure. Fold under the neckline by 1 centimeter and top stitch in place. To hem, fold up the hem by 0.5 centimeters twice to create a neat rolled hem. Iron after each fold and sew in place. I kind of hack this and I just fold it up once personally, and then when I get to the machine I use the first fold to fold it the second time. And finally we are done. That was the last step. I really hope you guys enjoyed making this. If you did, please like and subscribe for more future sewing tutorials and patterns. If you have any questions, either leave them in the comments below or you can send me a DM. But if you do decide to comment below, someone else who is having the same issue might be able to find that, and also of course that boosts my engagement. Lastly, thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time.